This episode of Settle the Score is sponsored by Sky Sports. Stream Sky Sports flexibly on Now. What you want, when you want, no fuss. Go to nowtv.co.uk to start streaming Sky Sports today. Hello and welcome to Settle the Score. My name is Harry Durham. It was another huge weekend of Premier League action, and there's just one place for us to go this morning, and that's straight back to the Emirates to look back on Arsenal scoring at the death and picking up a point against Manchester City. Joining me this morning is Harry Symeou from Chronicles of a Gooner and Amos Murphy from the City Ramble. Boys, you know the rules, right? There are none. I mean, you both veterans of this game now, that I'm just the middleman, all right? I'm not even like a referee. I'll throw in a few jabs here and there, but this is designed for you two to have a right old go at each other. I mean, with Arsenal scoring late and Arsenal being the home team, Mr. Harry Symeou, will start with your great self. I think a lot of us, I think the footballing world, no matter where you were, if you're in London, the Antarctic, South Africa, every single hemisphere of this great planet, no one really expected Pep Guardiola to park the bus, did they, H?
No, and the irony of it all is that Arsenal got untold amounts of stick last season for doing something very similar at the Etihad when they were winning and were down to 10 men. So listen, me personally, I'm not knocking it. Pep Guardiola is entitled to do whatever he wants to do, and I take it as a compliment. The fact that Manchester City felt that was the only way to get through what remained of the game, that says to me that Arsenal were the stronger side on the day, were the dominant side in a lot of ways. Obviously, though, missing that punch in the final third. And we all acknowledge that and we know that. But as I say, look, I'm not going to stick the boot in on Pep too much because, as I say, Mikel Arteta would probably be one of the first to do something similar. But it does tell you that Man City, as much as they won't admit this and Amos won't admit this, they do fear us a little bit these days.
Amos, your response?
I think, look, part the bus, that first half of City was very progressive. They made Arsenal look a bit shaky. And maybe that was self-inflicted from an Arsenal point of view. I don't know. But it only kind of settled into that rhythm at the start of the second half when it became very clear that Arsenal, they made the attacking subs, and City were going to have to find a way at the end of a very long week, a taxing week, 3 very intense big matches. Don't forget, before the international break, they'd lost 2 on the bounce. So this was, a massive week for Guardiola himself. It became clear that they needed to try and do something a little bit different because Kuznov goes off injured. He's a natural fast defender. They needed to sort of shake it up a little bit. Shake it up they did. Very nearly worked out. Obviously, I'm sure we'll get into the goal as well. But look, I think it's gone under the radar that this is, something new that Guardiola's done wrong. Last time he got a result at the Emirates Stadium in 2023, they had 36% possession. I think there's a difference between surrendering possession voluntarily and sort of not being able to get the ball back. And I think City's approach in the second half yesterday was certainly the former.
Do you think, though, that Pep Guardiola got it wrong to a point? Because do you think Arsenal would have scored maybe or maybe Arsenal wouldn't have scored if Manchester City were a little bit more front-footed and decided to kind of still remain that little bit more expansive and carried more of a threat down the other end of the pitch? Because I always say this, when Arteta does it, it felt like you were almost inviting pressure. When you see Haaland going off and you see others going off and centre-halves coming on, you think, well, we can take more risks now going forward because this lot are really worried and concerned, and so concerned that they've decided to abandon their attacking principles.
I totally, I get I can see why, but I think the context is what I've been preaching from the full-time whistle onwards, because I'm not using it as an excuse at all. I'm just using it as sort of painting the information in front of us. But 3 unchanged 11s for the first time since 2021 for Guardiola. That's unheard of. And you could see from the 65-minute mark onwards that a lot of those players were dead on the feet. Don't get me wrong, when those changes are happening, Doku, Haaland, I'd have loved those two to have stayed on the pitch for 90 minutes because they were the outlets. And ironically, the goal comes from City not being able to sort of retain possession in the Arsenal half. But I think had City done the alternative and tried to play almost how they usually do in those situations, Arsenal would have scored 3 or 4, as they did last season. The issue with City last season at times was the fact that Guardiola didn't have the players to play his football, and was still trying to do so. So you get instances of, City players passing it to Arsenal attackers in their own final third and then them scoring 4 goals in the second half. That didn't happen yesterday. So from my point of view, that's a step forward because City have, don't get me wrong, 2 seasons ago, I'd have been chucking stuff, I'd been crying, I'd been losing my mind if Guardiola was doing that against Arsenal. But I think the goalposts have moved at this point, so that City can go to the Emirates and say, you know what, fair enough. It is a bit of pragmatism that we haven't seen that often under Pep.
What was I'll get both of your reactions to this. The starting 11, Eberechi, Eza coming in at the half-time mark. Obviously, him and Bukayo Saka coming in on the second half. Do you think that was the right decision in hindsight, looking back over the result, that injection of Eberechi Eza at half-time, or would you have preferred to see him start? Because I think there's a lot of question marks over Leandro Trossard, even though he did score in the week in the Champions League.
Yeah, I was disappointed with the 11. I got to be honest. I sort of had done lots of preview content leading up to the game, and I kept saying, we are not going to dominate Manchester City in the midfield the way that we dominate others, because they've got runners, they've got technical ability. I mean, Reinders is an unbelievable player. What a signing he's turned out to be. I felt like Arsenal needed to not obsess about creativity in the middle of the park, just focus on winning the fight. And they needed to have the creativity in the wider areas. I was looking at Madueke. I was looking at Eza on the left. That was what I was hoping for. Trossard was great in midweek when he came off the bench, but Trossard is a super sub. That's where he's been at his best for Arsenal since he arrived at the football club. So the decision to start him, I get it was based on form and what he'd done in midweek, but to me, it was wrong. And it showed, I think a bit of a lack of ambition. I thought that, yes, Trossard's an attack-minded player and he's not going to work back as hard as maybe Martinelli would if he had played on the left. But I felt the creativity needed to live in those wide areas yesterday. That's where Arsenal needed to create their overloads. And I know he came on later in the game in a more central position and ultimately provided the assist. But to make 2 changes the way Mikel did at halftime, and I know the Madueke one was an injury for Madueke, but it feels to me like that was an admission from Mikel Arteta that, you know what, I've got this wrong. And I know we were a goal down and that changes the context, but it was an admission to me from Mikel Arteta to say, you know what, we should have been braver in this game. And the problem is, right, and the difficulty we have here, Harry, is that what you've got this pre-existing narrative that surrounds Mikel Arteta about his tactical approach. And I'm finding it difficult to split the two right now. How much of the reaction to yesterday's game is based on previous and how much of it is based on this game in isolation? I think you've got to be really careful in your analysis and make sure that you're looking at this game in isolation and not allowing previous narratives to creep in to the way that you view this one. But on the day, I thought he got it wrong.
Amos, with you being a Manchester City fan and with Erling Haaland scoring all the goals that he does for Manchester City, and you see a performance like Victor Gyökeres yesterday, there's a lot of talk on social media, and obviously you've got to take it all with a grain of salt. A lot of people are saying now, obviously, we're only 5 games in, but you look at Manchester United, you look at Liverpool, you look at Manchester City, everyone's already come up with the notion that Victor Gyökeres won't be able to do it against the top clubs in the Premier League. From the opposing view, and with you having Erling Haaland in your team who can score against absolutely anyone, do you agree with that notion, or is it still too early in the season to say things like that?
Yeah, another great performance from the tapping merchant, it has to be said, who's clearly only capable of scoring tappings. Look, I think the Gyökeres one is interesting because you look at Arsenal's Big Six record, they've had no issues in taking points or getting wins against the Big Six. And I know that's, again, like goalposts have moved because do we even count United in that anymore? Even still, like the bigger matches in a Premier League season haven't been the issues for Arsenal. To be fair, it has been the mid to sort of lower table matches. And so far against Leeds, against Forest, Gyökeres has popped up with decent performances. I think where this will become interesting for Arsenal is trying to get over the line in the Champions League, because that's the one thing Haaland in his first season came in. Leipzig scored, Bayern in the quarterfinal scored, could have got about 3 if it wasn't for Courtois sort of standing on his head in the semi-final. That's where Haaland really shifted the needle for City, was in the Champions League. There is a situation where Arsenal might look better in the league and they might get more points and might even win the league, but I don't know if this will harm them in the latter stages, just because it does look a little bit dysfunctional at times. And look, these things do take time, but he does kind of. I don't know. And I know Thierry Henry did a great piece on him in midweek, sort of just that edge, that sharpness. It doesn't seem to be there just yet, which you pay big buck. You kind of want it to walk in and be scoring goals every week.
I've got to defend Victor Gyökeres a little bit because, as you say, he's got 3 goals in 5 Premier League games so far, which isn't a bad record. And the alternative, as far as everyone was concerned, was Benjamin Sesko, and how's he doing at Manchester United? So, that's what I'd say to that. But also, yesterday felt like a game for me that was screaming out for Kai Havertz. The way it became a little bit chaotic at the end, the way that he's got that ability to drop deep as well as running behind. And, he's a more rounded player, Kai Havertz. He's not an out-and-out goal scorer like Victor Gyökeres, but he's a more out-and-out sort of all-round option, I beg your pardon, when he plays in that 9 role. I felt like yesterday we were really missing him. And just being able to bring him off the bench, I think, could have made a big difference. But I'm not panicking about Gyökeres. Teams are going to try and shut you down through the middle. I thought that's what Man City did really well. Talked about it when I was discussing the midfield. For me, it wasn't about trying to find a way through the middle. It was about trying to come round the sides, and I don't think Arsenal did enough of that. I think whoever played at 9 yesterday for Arsenal, for most of the game, probably would have struggled.
Lads, I've heard no one else speak about this, so I'm going to ask the question. Obviously, we saw it on our television screens, HNO, that you were in the stadium. Should Leandro Trossard have been sent off again against Manchester City for throwing the football at Bernardo Silva's, let's be scientific about it and not get ourselves in trouble, the bottom region of his body? Because I know that Bernardo Silva, about to say Marco Silva then, Bernardo Silva made a lot out of it, but at the same time, I think you put any male in that position and you get a football launched at that region, it's going to hurt.
I'd say so. Yeah, disgusting from Leo again. Horrendous. No, I as a football fan, I think my head would be on Jupiter itself if we'd seen red card about that. But at the same time, it was daft. Like, it was stupid, and I understand Bernardo Silva is a wind-up merchant. He is the definition of a player that you want playing for your team. And if he was playing against you, you'd absolutely hate him. But I don't know. And it's those underlying things watching from the outside looking in, because another one, totally different scenario. When Arsenal score in the 93rd minute, there's still 4 minutes left on the clock, and almost all of the players are spending a minute or so celebrating. It's those little mentality things that I look at from the outside looking in, having watched a team go and win 4 Premier League titles in a row, a treble, a Champions League, 6 Premier League titles since Guardiola arrived. I just look at little bits and little moments in matches that go, would a team that is really ready to win the Premier League title be doing that? And I think that Trossard one, the celebration, this is not celebration, please, by the way. You can celebrate, but you can also get your backsides back to the centre circle to kick off again. There are just a few little mentality issues I think that's still underlying, and maybe that's poking the bear a little bit. So I'll pass over to Harry to respond. But it's not my title race, or it doesn't look like it's going to be my title race. But there's 1 or 2 things that I'm just a bit like, spooky.
I can say that you've successfully poked the bear, because I get really frustrated with all the mentality talk around Arsenal, because mentality is impossible to measure. So it's very easy, I think, for people to go, that's the reason that they don't get over the line. Ultimately, that emotion and that connection that Mikel Arteta's Arsenal have created with the fan base again, that was missing for years, is why they're able to pull 92nd, 93rd minute sort of goals out of the bag. That's why they're able to do that, because of that attitude, because of that drive, because of the way the stadium kind of pushes them on. And I think, okay, in an ideal world, you get your head down, you pick up the ball, you run back to the centre circle. I get that, but I think there's a bit of over-analysis around the response to the goal. For me, if you are knocking on the door, you're minutes away from losing, and a player comes off of the bench and produces a goal like that, bearing in mind as well, this is a player that has had untold amounts of criticism from the Arsenal fans in the last few months about his sort of lack of productivity. He's done it in midweek off the bench, running behind goal. He's done it again against Manchester City. I think it's a moment that the emotions just get the better of you. I mean, I was commentating on the game yesterday and I screamed my head off. I don't think I've ever gone as high pitched as I did yesterday. So, like, yes, there was that thing of come on, get back on it and let's try and win the game. But I think ultimately you can't help but explode in emotion in those moments.
I think it's fine for the fan, like totally understandably fine for the fans. I don't know. I don't think. Put it this way: I think if that City at Anfield yesterday, Liverpool find a winner, they find a way to get a winner in those final 5 minutes because they've been doing that all season. If that was a City title winning team of past, I think they get the ball and they're kicking off within 30 seconds. For me, that was just one of them things where I'm like, there's still things to learn, I think, for this Arsenal team, which is fine because you tell where they've come from, where Arteta has taken them. Not, it's not a slight on them at all. But I think there is the biggest step. The hardest serve is the one to win Wimbledon, and I think that's what Arsenal are finding out right now.
Lads, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it as always. Can't wait for later on in the season so we can dissect more off the back of, more games in the season and not just 5, and we can get a proper understanding of where the title race will be going and who's won trophies and who hasn't. Amos Murphy, Harry Symeou, thank you so much for your time. This episode of Settle the Score is sponsored by Sky Sports. Stream Sky Sports flexibly on Now. What you want, when you want, no fuss. Go to nowtv.co.uk to start streaming Sky Sports today.